And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, good evening, good evening, Facebook. I would like to welcome everyone to the Accountable Youth Social Justice Town Hall. I am your host, Billy D. Williams. I am also the chairman and CEO of Accountable Youth Incorporated. So let me give you a really brief rundown of what's going to happen today. We're going to have a discussion on three topics. Our first topic will be about local policing. Our second will be about proper policing on a national level. And then our third topic is going to be about protesting. So before I go any further, I want to introduce everybody out there on Facebook to our panel. I guess I will give your names and you can give the people your title and a little something about yourself. We will start with Chief James.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for putting on this conversation. Brian James, I serve as the Chief of Police for Greensboro. I was appointed on February 1st, and I've been with the police department about the beginning of next year to be about 25 years that I've been with the police department, and I was born and raised in Greensboro.
Next, Chief Stroud.
Good evening, and Billy, I appreciate you having us too. I appreciate the invite to this. My name's Travis Stroud. I'm the interim chief of police for the High Point Police Department. Much like Brian, I'm a hometown guy from High Point. I grew up here, went to high school at High Point Andrews, and then went to school and then came back and got a job here. I've been with our police department for 25 years, and our chief of police retired at the end of July, and I took over as the interim chief of police on August the 1st. So I'm only about 50 some odd days into this job.
Welcome to the job, sir. We're glad to have you. And next, my favorite CEO of all time, Mr. John Swain, sir.
Don't set the bar so high now. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Billy, for inviting me to this program. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. My name is John Swain. I'm the CEO for the International Civil Rights Center Museum. Next month will be my 11 years of service to the Civil Rights Museum. And of all of the jobs that I've had in the world, this one is closest to my heart. I love the work that I get to do in this community and helping to build a better community for everyone to live in.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for coming out. Next, my sidekick and the person who I could not have done this with, Ms. Nashaka Proctor.
Hello, everyone. Nashaka Proctor. My company is Events by Nashaka. I am one of the board members for the Accountable Youth. I have been planning events and weddings now as a business for about 13 years. I have about 20 years of experience in planning events, and I am also a A&T alum. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And last but not least, something that was not on the flyer, but a surprise that we had for this specific event. We have a special guest moderator, and this young lady's name is Alana Thornton. Miss Thornton, please.
Hi, I'm Miss Alana Thornton, Network Relations Officer for the Youth Leadership Committee for Leadership Links. I'm happy to be here, and I hope this goes well.
Awesome. So for those who weren't aware, and I guess that's everybody that's watching right now, like Alana said, she comes to us by way of Leadership Links. So to further explain what's going on here, Accountable Youth has a focus in mentoring our youth, but we also have a focus in bridging the gap between the police departments and the communities that they serve. So when we were putting this event together, we found the need to not only present questions from adults, but from young people as well. Because in our mind, we believe that they are the most impacted by what we're seeing going on across the country. And not to mention, they are our future leaders, and they are soon to be voters, if not new voters. So when we took in questions, we partnered with other organizations that specialize in youth development, like Leadership Links, and we allowed them to send in questions as well, because they never get the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with two chief of police or a civil rights expert. So with that being said, Alana participated in that process, and today she will be the voice of the young people who submitted questions. So she will represent her peers, and we're very glad to have her. And thank you for pulling this off in such a short period of time, Alana. That means a lot to us. So with that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to Shaka so she can talk about the purpose of the town hall.
Sure. So our purpose for the town hall to action discussions is really threefold. One, to create an environment that's transparent and accountable between the police and communities that they serve. Second, to plan to partner as well as to mobilize this movement forward. We want to work on legislation, of course, the issues that we come across as it relates to police department and the community. The third point is to build a coalition, right? Involved with the awareness of the police, any activities that go on that we need to be aware of, local government, as well as to provide a hub of communication for our community. So that's our threefold purpose with these town halls to action. This is the first one. We have a second one that we'll talk about later. That will be next month. Now, this next part of this discussion that we're going to have with our panelists, this is focused on the impact of policing in Guilford County and also the impact of local protesting. So I am going to pass it back to Billy to kind of kick us off with our panel discussion. So there you go.
All right, thank you so much, Shaka. Like she said, in this first conversation, let's jump into it. We'll be asking questions about local policing and how the BLM movement has looked for us, as well as crime in the city. So the first question we're going to allow Ms. Thornton to present it to the panel. Ms. Thornton?
This question is for Chief James and Chief Stroud. It comes from Ramaya Summers from Jamestown in Sheets 15. She asks, with everything going on with police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement, what is your goal moving forward to help enforce change for African Americans in today's society?
And
I'm sorry.
I was just going to let everybody know we're going to try to keep it to 2 minutes per answer, but this one is for Chief Stroud and Chief James. So Chief James, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no problem. And I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. The first thing I want to talk about, we've obviously seen a lot of incidents throughout the country in reference to police brutality. And what I'll tell you from the position I'm in, the first thing that I have to make sure of is that we have a relationship with the community. That's the first thing, that we have to be open, we have to be transparent, we have to have conversations like this. The next big thing for me is that I have to make sure that I'm hiring the right people. So when you talk about standards and how you do backgrounds, how you do psychological testing, you have to make sure that you're hiring the right people. And then also you have to look at what the demographics of your community are. And Greensboro, we're a very diverse community. So a lot of our efforts are geared towards trying to recruit minorities and women to try to reflect the community that we serve. And we still need help with that, quite honestly. And I know a lot of departments do. The other part is making sure that you've got proper training in place for your officers so that they know what's expected of them and how they are to treat the citizens that we serve when they go out, so you can avoid the incidents of police brutality. If they're properly trained, those incidents of excessive force is typically how we classify it. If they're properly trained, you're not going to see those incidents of excessive force. So you have to make sure you have a very strict training regimen in place to make sure that they know what they're supposed to be doing. And the other part is policies. Is you have to make sure you've got policies in place that are clear about what is expected of those officers when they go out, essentially what the rules are, not necessarily always what the law says, but also what your individual policies say, and making sure that they understand that before they go out. The other part too is to make sure that you got a process in place that if a citizen has an issue with a police officer, that you've got a process in place through, we call it professional standards. A lot of people refer to it as internal affairs, and make sure that people understand how to actually get in touch with your department or your city officials if they have a issue with a police officer, so that we can follow up on that and determine whether or not that officer violated one of our policies. So that's really quick and in a nutshell. I'm sure Travis has some stuff that he can add to it, but those are kind of the main things that we hit upon to make sure that we avoid incidents of excessive force or police brutality.
Thank you, Chief James. Chief Stroud, your go.
Chief James is exactly right. I mean, a lot of the points he hit are exactly what we're going to fall in line with as the High Point Police Department. But I agree. And as far as the question goes, I don't think it comes down to enforcing change in society. We want to facilitate or promote that. We're not looking to enforce anything but the law. You got to want to change. And I think you have to recognize that maybe things aren't so good to start moving along that direction. That comes from the community and the police department. But for us, Brian said it best. We have to have open lines of communication with each other, and it has to be a conversation. From our end, one of our operating philosophies here is only worry about what you can control. But we control our police department. And I think our officers, we get so locked into enforcement mode sometimes that we fail to see the other part of that equation, which is the citizen on the other end of that interaction that we're dealing with. And we fail to have probably the level of empathy that we need. We don't see past the enforcement part of it. And I think it's going to be a learning curve for our folks to really get in line with that, to see both sides, the police side and the community. I know we're the police, but we need to see the other side as well. We want the public to have a better understanding of what we do, but more importantly, why are we doing what we're doing? I think once you take the time to explain the why to people, there probably is a better understanding in there. But that comes with open lines of communication and being transparent on our end. Sometimes I think through the years of law enforcement, we've not been the greatest at doing that, but I think we're all sort of coming around now and saying this is the way you have to be. You got to establish that trust with your community. We do need some of our community partners to get involved. Law enforcement cannot solve every problem, period.
So Chief Stroud, with 15 seconds left on your question, are you putting anything in place as far as sensitivity training for the officers out there?
Yeah, well, we a lot of that's already been in place.
Okay, great.
For years we've been doing that, but yes, we're exploring all kinds of options now that we haven't touched before because we need to make a shift.
Thank you.
And can I just say one thing? I'm sorry.
Go for it.
A couple extra seconds. One thing Travis kind of hit upon about explaining things to people. It's something we've been doing for several years. It's called procedural justice. And if you Google it, all kinds of articles and scholarly articles will come up. But procedural justice really is explaining to people what you're doing. So, even if you're on a traffic, making sure you're explaining to the person, I'm Officer James. The reason why I stopped you is because you were doing 51 and a 35. Could I see your license registration? Versus just walking up and just saying, hey, let me see your license registration. That's just a simple example, but that's something that that goes a long way because people know it de-escalates it. It kind of cools the temperature and they know exactly why you're there. The other part, we have done in Greensboro a lot of what we call racial equity training. We do that in the academy, and we're trying to implement that even on a greater scale across the department. So we are doing a lot of training that honestly probably 10 years ago we weren't doing. So we are looking at what's going on in the world, what people are concerned about, and we're trying to get better.
Awesome. Thanks for chiming in.
Yes, sir.
Nashaka, question 2 for you. Go for it.
Yes, I'm going to start with Chief Stroud, and then Chief James, you can jump in as well. As far as crime goes, since the protests, have you seen a spike? And if so, what kind of crime, and what do you need from the community to address this problem?
For us in High Point, the answer is a yes and a no. No, as far as the spike goes, overall, our numbers are down for the year. I mean, I think we're down like 14% in impact crimes, which is awesome. And I love that. But at the same time, it only takes one incident to spin your numbers out of control and through the roof. Now, the yes part of that, we have seen small spikes that really did coincide with the time where the protests were the heaviest. We did see some pretty substantial spikes, maybe a week or two at a time. And those crimes involved a lot of aggravated assaults, gun violence, specifically drive-by shootings were pretty busy for a while. We even had, a lot of assault with deadly weapons where people were actually shot, and our homicides went up for a short period of time. So no, our numbers are overall down, but yes, we have seen the spikes. And as far as, even the smallest spikes should be concerning. I'm telling you, those impact crimes will drive your city into the ground. The livability will go down for everybody. But as far as what can the community do, We need information and time. We're not there. Cities are too big for our small number of officers to patrol all the time. People are there, they see, they hear. We need that information, and then we need time to investigate. You got to give us that process to go forward with the investigation. Everything's not made instantly overnight. We got to have time to come up with answers.
Okay. Chief James?
We have seen an increase in crime in Greensboro, and I'm going to say particularly in violent crime. Right now, we are up compared to last year. We are up 14% in our violent crime. And as of right now, and I'm not proud to say this, we've had 40 homicides in the city of Greensboro.
Wow.
Our record is 45, which was last year. So I am very concerned about that. What I would say is that we do need the community's help. And there are a lot of things now. You know, we look on the surface as far as actually solving the crime. We talk about we do need information. We do need people to have relationships with us where they do feel comfortable calling us and giving us information and actually telling us things that are going on before these incidents happen. But what I'll tell you also is that as a city, we have to really look on a greater scale at what the root causes of some of these things are, because when I look into a lot of the areas where crime is occurring, there are a lot of other things that are going on that we need to address. A lot of that is around poverty in general. It's around housing. It's around unemployment. It's around education. It's around healthcare. Those are kind of the big, I think I listed 5 things. The 5 things I think that plague a lot of our communities. And a lot of those things result in police calls. And I always use this simple example. You talk about mental health, and that's a real big topic right now as far as how we deal with the mentally ill. Got health insurance and I've got an issue, you know, I may be able to go to a doctor and get medicine or go to a counselor and I can function normally. I can get up every day and go to work and live a normal life, you know, but if I don't have access to that health care and I can't get my meds and I don't have access to a counselor, then when I have a critical type episode, then somebody calls the police and then the police have to come and try to respond to that the best we can. And oftentimes we're not the best equipped to deal with certain situations. You know, a person could be violent, but then they may not be violent and just have a mental episode. And perhaps we need to get a counselor involved. And we're actually doing a program now where we've got some behavioral health clinicians that are actually responding with us. But the thing is this, there are a lot of root causes that develop into police calls. And we as a community have to look at that and see where we need to invest further to try to help the people in our community that actually need some greater assistance.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great answer from both gentlemen. I guess I'll do this third question. And of course, well, I want to present this question. This is the final question of the first conversation. I want to present this one to the entire panel. Being that you all are affected differently, personally and professionally, by the protests, I would like to know what were some of your likes and dislikes from the protests that we've seen as police officers, as people. And with this one, we'll start with Mr. Swain.
Thank you, Billy. During the protests on May 30th, 31st, and so forth, I think the one thing that I observed most is, for the most part, peaceful protests. I mean, this is in our First Amendment rights to have freedom of speech. And where we get the movement from is the community moving together, focused on a single ideal, and that is racial equity, justice, these types of things. I was quite impressed that the community came out to speak about these issues. Sometimes that's the place for it. With the Civil Rights Museum, that's what we do. We talk to people about nonviolent, peaceful protests and how to effectively bring about changes in the country. The dislikes, I hate that it came about in the way that it did. Having to sit and watch a man lose his life, that was quite deplorable. But when it came down to the protests themselves, some of the looting and violence that did take place, it was kind of hard to go down the street to your neighbors and see the tears. And oftentimes, many of these businesses were just struggling to just hold on. So as one of our officials have recently said, looting and destroying property is not protesting. So that was a little disappointing to see.
Gotcha. Next would be Chief James.
I'll echo some of the things that Mr. Swain said, and of course we had a different perspective. What I'll say is that a majority of the protesters that we experienced here in Greensboro were peaceful. There were some that destroyed property and some looting and things like that. And what I'll say is that I do hate also the way it came about, but I was happy to see people that were protesting, making their voices heard within the law. What I didn't like about it was the part of the looting and the property destruction, because what I felt was that the people that participated in that absolutely was not protesting. And I think what it does is it takes away from the overall efforts of the people that were trying to make their voices heard and really promoting change. And what I don't like, even from a media perspective, in some cases, is that the protest, the peaceful protest, gets less coverage than the looting and the vandalism. And it really takes away from what the people that came out and honestly tried to make their voices heard in a peaceful way and promote change. And oftentimes, we can't control the media coverage, but we certainly can control the after action. And what I've told people is that the protest got a lot of people's attention. There are a lot of people saying that they want to do something now to move us forward. So now is the time to cash in those promises and let's get to work.
I agree wholeheartedly. Chief Stroud.
I agree with both who spoke before me. I can only speak for High Point. Our protests that we had in High Point were overwhelmingly, predominantly peaceful. We only had a small fraction that were any sort of violence, looting, vandalism, and stuff like that. So I'm very proud of our citizens who did that. They were able to speak their voice and they got something mobilized. I don't know if that we would be doing the changes that we are now without that happening. So there's a lot of good things. I saw some people step up. Some of our community leaders really act like community leaders throughout this. And I'm proud of them for doing that, because it's hard to stand that line sometimes. A couple things I don't like, though. Too many good officers have been lumped in with the bad. It's just in general, because you wear the uniform, whether it be the one that Brian's wearing, the one I'm wearing. All of a sudden, because you were wearing the uniform, you were the same as the guy with the knee on the neck. And that is not the majority of what you see out here. These officers are wonderful people and they do a great job. I also don't like the way a lot of our African-American officers were treated. They were treated very poorly during some of these protests. Some of the things that the protesters said to them, it's bothersome. These are my friends. I've worked with them for a long time. I've grown up with them. I know who they are. I think they're bothered by it, but they stood there and they weathered the storm. They didn't deserve that. But I'm very proud of them for the way they handled themselves. Then the last part, there are some community leaders that didn't step up during this process. Let's be honest. There's some I would have liked to seen step to the forefront and really lead this charge the right way, and they missed a golden opportunity. And that's on them, though. I can't make them do that.
Right. To everybody's point, and to one of the things that made me want to start Accountable Youth, it was just with a military background and being trained, and having an uncle who was also a deputy sheriff in Guilford County. I've always felt as though we're not looking at each other as human beings, right? You just see the suit and you automatically associate it with the worst example of somebody who wears that suit. So just as a person who started a nonprofit who wanted to bridge the gap between the community and the police department, one of the biggest things that we've tried to do, and that's what we're even doing here today, to Chief Stroud's point, is just allowing the public to see you all in another platform or in another space in which it's not because you've been called out there, or it's not because somebody was pulled over, or anything like that. So to have you two gentlemen on here, and just to be completely honest, to have one white police chief and one black one on this panel says a lot. And it also, I hope that for the people that are watching this, whether it's live or whether they watch it at a later period, that they are able to see the humanity in everybody. When people get pulled over, they want to go home. And police officers, when they pull somebody over, they want to go home. Right. So I think if everybody just had that in the back of their heads when they're in those moments, it would do a lot for interactions between police officers and, the public. But that's just my piece. And you all, thank you so much for that. So I guess we will move into our second conversation, which is proper policing. And this is more of a situation where we're going to talk from a broader scope, and more, you might hear a question in there that's more to the nation, which is something that we needed to have in this sense. We're not just talking to people in North Carolina, we're talking to everybody across the country since we're on Facebook Live. So I will turn that over to Nashaka.
Yeah, so this segment, it's gonna be broader but deeper. And it's going to give us a little bit more content as it relates to police practices and also reform. So we're going to kick this off to Alana to give us our first question.
This question comes from Miss Nariah Carson. She's 15 and she's from Greensboro. She's asking, what are the criteria for using a taser instead of a gun? And if there is no protocol relating to this, can they enforce pulling out a taser first instead of a gun?
Yeah, I think that one goes to me first. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, go for it.
Well, first of all, from the High Point side, just to let you know, be as quick as I can. We actually removed the taser from our use of force tools. It became simply too expensive for us to maintain that. And with our budget cuts, it had to go. But I can speak to when it was in our use of force. For us, when I could go on days and days in our use of force continuum, it was pretty high in the continuum. Our use of force continuum is strictly based on what the offender is doing. Whatever action they're doing dictates what our officer can do. So the taser was pretty high. The offender for us had to be in a level 4, which had to be actively assaultive, meaning they're trying to hurt you, not running away or anything like that. It's physically fighting our officers. So that's where we put our taser in level 4 is what we call it. So there's only 5 levels, and the 5th level would be like a deadly force. So we're very close to the end of the continuum for us. We like to allow our officers, the discretion on what tools to use. We give them the training that goes with it. But the taser was pretty high in there. We didn't mandate when they pulled it, but clearly that was one of the part of the continuum before you get to deadly force, of course. The tool was somewhat effective. I think it's a good tool, but it just became too much for us to maintain. But it all comes down to training and this is the importance of having reality-based training for your officers. It comes down to that. You've got to put people in situations where they're stress inoculated and they react in that training environment before you see it in the street. And that could apply to a taser, a baton, pepper spray, your handgun, doesn't matter what it is. So for us, we did not have a protocol in place, but it was in the continuum where we went through the continuum before you got to it.
Gotcha.
So I'll start out talking about really the difference between taser and gun as far as when you use it. So it's called use of force continuum, and a lot of departments we call it use of force options. And we do still have the taser. And just to give you an example, when we talk about deadly force, the only time you can use an officer is authorized to use deadly force is if they are under the threat of deadly force or serious bodily injury, or a third person is under the threat of serious of deadly force or serious bodily injury. So, for instance, it might be appropriate if, for instance, if I go to a call and if a person pointed a firearm at me, then I may be authorized to use my firearm. But it could be a situation where a person is combative and perhaps they have a knife in their hand. Now, we also have pepper spray, which is an option as well, but it may be appropriate if a person is armed with a knife at a particular distance, it may be appropriate to use a taser. Now, I would tell you in certain instances, if a person is armed with a knife and they're combative, it may be appropriate to use a firearm because a knife can be considered a deadly weapon. So the thing, and I want to piggyback a little bit on what Travis said, you have to put officers in these situations before they actually face them on the street. So for instance, like in the academy, we run our own academy on a basic law enforcement training setting. Typically, officers are actually put through scenarios and they'll come into a situation and the person may be completely compliant, they may be passively resistant, or they may be totally resistant. And then the officer has to make a decision about what they do. Now, that could be anything from giving a person verbal commands to using what would be considered an intermediate weapon, which may be a taser, maybe pepper spray, or it could be deadly force. And then we evaluate those officers based on the decisions that they made, and we run them through those scenarios. But it is clear, what I want to say, it is absolutely clear that an officer can only use deadly force, can use a weapon when they are under the threat of deadly force, serious bodily injury, or a third person is under that threat as well. So it's very, really, quite honestly, it's a last resort. It's when you absolutely have nothing else you can do besides use deadly force. So there are very few instances where that actually presents itself.
So for the sake of this conversation, and for people that are watching, there are a whole lot of people, and there's a stigma out there that people believe that police officers are just trained shoot to kill. And so what you're saying here is that that's not the case, and that you have to use the appropriate amount of force.
Right, and there's certainly examples out there where officers did not use the appropriate amount of force, and we've seen those. And I'll tell you, every time one of those examples happen, we almost go back to square one with people that we've built trust with, and then even it can happen clear across the country, but then we got to start rebuilding trust right here in Greensboro. And then I have to explain to people, well, this is what we do. This is how we train our officers, and do everything that's in my power to make sure that those incidents don't happen right here in our city.
Good stuff. So that could not lead into our next question any better. Talking about continuum, talking about trust, talking about excessive force, and also to just be as on topic and as recent as I possibly can be. Right now, we are in the midst of dealing with the Breonna Taylor decision, and what the government chose to do with the police officers who were involved in the altercation that took Breonna Taylor's life. I'm sure that there's civil unrest. I was just watching the news before we jumped on this call, and the police are out in huge numbers in Louisville right now, awaiting or just making sure that nothing turns violent or crazy, or with riots and protests that they are expecting to happen. But this also speaks to our police reform bill that we spoke about in one-on-one situations. And it's a question that I wanted to present to both of the chiefs right now. For those who don't know, there is a police reform bill that is in Congress that they're trying to decide on whether or not they want to pass it or not. Some of the things that are in this police reform bill are banning chokeholds, require de-escalation, require warning before shooting. They require that police officers exhaust all other means before shooting. They also require that other officers have a duty to intervene. They want to ban the shooting of moving vehicles. This other one is require use of force continuum, which both chiefs just mentioned. And lastly, require comprehensive reporting. Okay. For those who don't know, of course, this is also called 8 can't wait. That is the bill. So my question to you all, and something that I'm assuming that a lot of people out there don't know, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation. So people just see so many things in the news, they see so many things on social media, and they just assume that one police force is the same across the board. So what I would like to talk about, what I would like to ask you all is, I do know that police officers are able to write in their own policy when they see something that needs to be addressed in their department. So considering Breonna Taylor's, the officers that were involved in that, they weren't charged with nobody was charged with her death per se. So just in my opinion, I kind of feel as though that does not bode well with the actual police reform bill, because it kind of takes away from it, or it kind of feels like the government is more leaning towards, or at least the government in Louisville aren't really adhering to 8 Can't Wait. So my question to the chiefs is, how do you feel about 8 Can't Wait, and have you done anything in your department specifically to address these items? And we'll start with Chief James.
Okay. Yeah, so we definitely can't wait, and they really are a lot of common sense things that departments can do. Now, what I'll tell you, when you talk about local police departments across the country, there are over 18,000 police departments, and that's what makes it so difficult, I guess, to get uniformity across the whole nation, because what we're doing in Greensboro or High Point, they could be doing something totally different in Savannah, Georgia, or anywhere. As far as the 8 Can't Wait, so I changed some policies. Actually, I got appointed February 1st. On February the 10th, I actually put in a policy about not shooting or banning the shooting of moving motor vehicles. That was, even before a lot of these things were being talked about on a national scale, but I put that in policy back in February. Back in the first week of January, I put in a policy about banning chokeholds. Unless, and I talked about deadly force a minute ago, unless you are under the threat of deadly force, because a chokehold would be considered deadly force, or any kind of maneuver that would restrict blood flow or oxygen to a person. So we put that in policy. We do de-escalation training throughout the department, including our academy. We've done that for a number of years, and we continue to do that in the classroom, and also scenario-based. The required warning before shooting. So I put in a policy in July, and what it is a policy asking officers, or mandating officers, warn people before using any kind of force, including deadly force if possible. And let me explain that. So when you talk about warning before shooting, I give the example of this. If I walked into a situation with an active shooter, then it may not be appropriate for me to warn the person before shooting. I may have to go ahead and address the shooter immediately and maybe not even speak a word. It really just depends on the situation. So we put in a policy about warning before using any kind of force when possible. That could be that we warn somebody before we use a taser or pepper spray or anything like that. We also put in a duty to intervene. We already had a policy that required officers to report anytime that another officer violated a policy, but we specifically put in a policy on a duty to intervene if another officer is using excessive force, and that's either verbally and or physically, that they have to intervene. If they don't intervene, then they actually are in violation of policy as well. We also, again, we already talked about the use of force continuum, or the use of force options, and then also require comprehensive reporting. So anytime an officer has a use of force in the department, they are required to report that force to a supervisor. And I'll give you an example. Even if, for instance, if we were trying to arrest a combative subject, and during the course of making that arrest, the subject scraped their knee or their elbow or something like that, if they suffer any kind of bodily injury at all, no matter how minor it is, we report that as a use of force. And that's in our policy. So we actually have policies now that address all of the 8 Can't Wait requests.
Awesome. Chief Stroud.
Yeah, and Brian hit the nail on the head in the beginning. I like 8 Can't Wait. I do. I think it's common sense. He used the words correctly. And I think it's good, solid police work. But he also is correct. You look at the large number of agencies across the nation. That's a lot of police agencies. Some are very, very big and they have the ability to put these things in. Some are very small departments of 2 and 3 people and may not have the same training level that Greensboro or a High Point does, don't have the same policies in place. So it's got to be across the board. And that's the hard part to tackle. Yes, we do. Same as Brian. We have every one of the 8 can't wait points in our policy. We've never been taught chokeholds. I've been doing this 25 years and not one time as an instructor ever told me you do this to put someone in a chokehold. The best I can give you is what I've seen on wrestling on Saturday mornings. And I'm not lying. We don't do those things. We never did. We do de-escalation. And the goal of de-escalation is you want voluntary compliance from your offender where you have no force in the end. That's your ultimate goal. And anything less clearly than deadly force is good. That's what we want too. But we can avoid force, we're going to. Brian is right. The warning before shooting is problematic though, because sometimes you may not be able to do that. And if you just read it, can't wait on the face, just in the bullet points, if you don't give a warning, it seems like you violate it, but that's not the case. We do have the duty to intervene. That's in our policy. But to me, that's just doing the right thing anyway. If you see that going on, that's what should have happened in Minneapolis. Someone should have said, whoa, hang on. And maybe we're in a different boat. I don't know, but they didn't do those things. That use of force continuum has been in existence. I've been here 25 years and we've had our continuum in place long before that. The only another worry I have is the comprehensive reporting. We're like Brian, we report everything in a use of force. If you strictly look at the numbers, if you just gave them the number on use of force, it may seem, oh, that's a lot. But we report every small thing. You know, for example, somebody's trying to kick us, we put a hopple around their legs so they can't kick. To us, that's a use of force. It's non-invasive. It's designed to stop things. But if you look at that, could have 5 of those. And that would seem like a lot, but we're really not hurting anybody at all. It's designed to stop any other action. So there's some concerns with 8 can't wait, but yes, I like it. I think it's good. I think it's just good police work overall.
Awesome. Nashaka, that one took a little bit, but
Sorry.
To you for the no. I was going.
That's good.
But Nashaka, she's gonna give the final question for this topic, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay. So the final question I have in this subject before we move to proper protesting, generally speaking, what are your foremost long and short-term goals for the communities that you serve? And I want to start this question out with Mr. Swain.
Thank you. The community that we serve is a very significant community, and it extends beyond just Guilford County. We receive people here at the Civil Rights Museum from all over the world, and it's an excellent opportunity to educate folks about the work that we do here in the community, but it's also similar principles that they can take back to their own communities. And the most important one is open dialogue. Start engaging dialogues. Get to know who your neighbors are. So short term, my goal is to continue that dialogue. We have been a force for that here in downtown Greensboro. And I think just about everybody on this call almost we have worked with. We've worked with the Greensboro Police Department with their cadets. They were just here yesterday for their tour of the Civil Rights Museum. And that is something quite powerful. My long-term goal for this community, and when I refer to community, I'm not talking about the white community, the Black community, the Jewish community, or the Asian community. When I say community, all of my life, it has been community. Everybody. No one can build a powerful community by holding on to just one segment of that community. We need everybody in the fight. So my long-term goal would be that we would continue to form that more perfect union here in Greensboro and aspire to be a civil rights city, looking at everything that we do through the lens of civil and human rights.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm going to jump to Chief Stroud and then Chief James, if you can answer those quickly so that we can move into the last segment. Thank you.
Well, I'll combine them. It's a short and long-term goal for us in the police department here. Yeah, I would love for us to be able to establish a level of trust with our community where when we have things happen, that they trust us enough that we are going to investigate properly and good or bad, the outcome, and then deal with it. Too many times we see things happen and all of a sudden we are into whatever violent mode. That's what's happening across the country. This happens and we're into violence. I would love to be able to think that we could move into the trust factor. They say, okay, let's let the police department do their thing, come out, be transparent. We tell us what we can do and then deal with it if we have a problem. That's a long and short-term goal. I'm really looking at short-term because I'm worried that if something happens tonight, it could go bad for us. We answer over 400 calls a day. So to think every one of them is going to go wonderfully that's crazy. But most of them do. So, but that level of trust, but Mr. Swain's right. It's about having open dialogue and conversations. That's how you establish trust. So that's short and long-term goals for us.
Okay.
I'll tell you, my short-term goal is I want everyone in Greensboro to feel like they live in a safe community, because I know that there's some people that don't feel like they live in a safe community. And there are a lot of factors in that, including the service that we provide and a lot of other factors that are involved in that. And we're trying to do what we can to make sure that those communities remain safe. The other part of that, the long-term goal, which is really more extensive because it requires time, but it is trust. I want the community to trust us. I also want them to feel like we're a part of the community. I don't ever want the community to feel like we're some type of occupying force and we're here just to arrest people and just to answer calls. I want them to actually feel like we're a part of the community, and that has a lot to do with us. One thing I've told officers time and time again, you may work a community and you may deal with people that are violating the law on a regular basis, but you got to stop and get out of your car and talk to that person that's sitting on the front porch or mowing their grass or whatever the case is, because that's who actually lives in our communities, and they want the same thing that everybody wants. They want to be able to go to sleep at night and feel safe in their homes. They want to be free of violence. They want to be free of really anything that impacts their quality of life. And I want that to happen right now. So that's a short-term goal. The trust building, that's an ongoing process, and we continually have to work on that.
Thank you. Okay, Billy?
Awesome. So let's roll right into our final topic, which is proper protesting. The Chiefs can take a little bit of a break, and me and Mr. Swain can have a little dialogue here. So we've seen our fair share of protesting in Greensboro. Not to mention, our city also has a rich history in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So Mr. Swain, being the CEO of the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, I mean, just for a moment, while we're on protesting, I would love for you just to speak about some things that are going on at the museum.
Sure. Since the museum suspended its operations back on March 19th of this year due to the COVID crisis, we have taken the opportunity to continue to move forward, build new programs, build new styles of delivery, post more information on our website about virtual tours that can be done. But we must continue to work as a community and move forward. And so a lot of what we have done here at this museum is continue to build on the successes of the past. This year we opened up just booked to the hilt for the whole year. We've turned away over $550,000 of revenue this summer, and that has been quite impactful here. But I've been quite impressed that corporations just out of the blue have stepped up during this time, realizing the importance of a jewel like this in this community where we can educate people about powerful protesting. They have stepped up and they have helped to support the organization to keep it afloat and moving forward. So we're going to continue to do those things because this institution is needed more than ever in this country.
Great. Also, I saw online that there is a fundraiser going on right now. Is that correct?
That is correct. I posted a fundraiser to help with museum operating costs because we have lost so much this year. We had someone to recently make a significant gift to the museum, $25,000. Another one for $5,000. I'm not able to post those just yet, but they're coming. So yes, we put that fundraiser out there so that people can dial on, take the tour of the museum at any time that is convenient for them.
And they can find the donation for those who want to give, I know, on the Facebook page. And is it also on your website?
Absolutely. Sit-in Museum for our Facebook page and sitin.org for our website.
Awesome. So as we're drawing close to time, I had a couple of questions for you. So my first question would be, we are exactly 60 years removed from the Woolworth sit-ins. It's apparent that times have changed. So of course, if time changed, protesting tactics have changed as well. There are a lot of things that I saw that are similar to the way that we used to do things during the civil rights movement. However, we cannot do those things completely the way we did them in the past. So my question to you is, how do we update our ways of protesting so that we can be as effective, if not more effective, than we were in the 60s?
Absolutely. The thing that they did not have back then was a lot of technology and quick access to communications. The most powerful thing that we can do as a body is to learn about the issues, engage in things that are happening in the community. I've just been blown away by people walking into this museum, and when they get back to our front lobby, the things that they have learned. The strategy sessions that people used back then, they're still using strategies today. Planning, sustained direct action. It took those protesters in 1960, from February 1 of 1960 to July 25th, every single day coming here. They didn't back off and take a rest because it was raining outside. They brought about powerful changes because that is the job of the people. When the people are upset about an issue, they must speak. And they speak with a movement, people moving together. And our leaders in the community, their job is to properly respond if they're going to continue to lead. So we've been quite fortunate that in Greensboro, there hasn't been a huge amount of damage like in other cities, but that's because we have engaged with one another, and we continue to engage with one another to build that more perfect union that we all aspire to. We have to live here. So it did come to my attention that some of the damage that was being done to our home was from protesters who did not live in this city. So it's all about coming together as a people. Yes, register your voice, but also let those who are in power know when you're not satisfied with an issue, and move to change it.
Stuff. Shaka, you had a question.
Yes, Mr. Swain. So for our viewers, for our community, if you would speak to what is the best way to organize and to mobilize going forward?
The best way to organize is to find something that you care about and learn all that you can learn about it. Don't just stand in a line or show up at a gathering. It could very well be something that you don't want to be attached to, but learn about the issues. Stay tuned. Our government is quite open and wide, and I have to give them credit for the great work that they do in being transparent. They hold public meetings for people to learn about issues that are taking place. Show up. The best thing to do is just show up and learn.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And Alana, you will give the final question to the entire board.
This question is for Mr. Swain, Chief James, and Chief Stroud. The question comes from Chase Clark. She is from Colfax and she's 16. She's asking, Personally, I feel it is absurd that we don't know some of our local officials by name. I feel that there should be more effort put into community outreach across the board. What are some ways we can effectively begin this community outreach?
And Mr. Swain, you can go ahead and take the lead.
Sure. And I'm back to my original point. Show up, participate in the council meetings, and learn about the issues. All of our elected officials, police chiefs, I see them out quite often, but it's responsibility that we have to take as citizens to also call, make a telephone call, ask for a meeting, ask to be able to participate in a discussion. I think that's about the best way that you can find out who is who's doing what. I get lots of calls here, and people always say, I'm surprised that I'm able to get to you so easily and that you're returning your calls. Well, I feel like I have a responsibility to this community, and I have to be quite responsive.
Awesome. Chief James.
All right. I don't know if I should say this, but Chase actually goes to my church, so she does know me. But that's a great question. What I'll say is this, is that it is twofold. We have to make an effort. One thing that we did back when I first got the chief's job, we went out and we were doing community meetings weekly. We had to shut those down because of COVID. But just like you, Billy and Nashaka, you reached to us last year, and we were able to collaborate at the Civil Rights Museum, just like we're doing now. And I'll tell you personally, it's tough, but I try to make time for everybody that wants to meet with me or talk to me. Sometimes I do have to get a deputy chief to fill in for me, but we want to connect with the community, and I certainly want you to know who I am. And even during COVID season, I'm doing my best, and our staff is doing our best to make sure that we're still out in the community and that we're accessible. And that all factors into us building trust in the community and creating transparency.
And I agree. I'll keep my answer very brief. I tell you, this is a good start. Things like this tonight. While I know nobody's in love with COVID, it has exposed us to new methods of communication like this. We're able to reach out to a lot of people that is very convenient. Now, I would love to do things face to face. Much like Brian, time is of the essence. So we do try to get out there. We're only 50 some odd days into this leadership function of the High Point Police Department. We're rolling out a new strategic plan where community engagement is a pillar on which we're going to build the rest of our department. But this police department is so much bigger than me. I understand that my job as interim chief, but we are trying to involve a lot more of our leadership level people in these community meetings where they see those faces. That's your next leaders at the police department. I mean, one day I will leave and they will take over. And that's how you build those bonds, is having these conversations like this. But this is a good start. I commend you for the way you've done this. It's been very professional, because sometimes that is not what we see when we have these community meetings. A lot of them don't go as well as this, quite frankly. They become attacks and barrages, and your shields go up. I don't care who you are. So for stuff like this, I'm very impressed with what you've done.
Wow. Thank you so much. And, as we come to this close, I just want to personally say thank you all for being a part of this panel discussion and bringing your feedback to our questions and just helping to bridge that gap. I also want to thank, of course, our founder of Accountable Youth, Billy Williams. He's going to come and close us out, but he's also going to share with us our other board members that are part of our organization, as well as sharing the second part to this conversation, because we want to keep these town hall discussions going to help us continue to move not only the movement forward, but we want action, we want changes, we want transparency and accountability, and we want to be a part of bridging that gap. So Bill, if you would come and close us out, and of course, thank our viewers for being a part of this conversation.
Facebook, thank you so much for everybody who chimed in. For those who missed it, we'll be sure to make this available on our YouTube page, and we'll post it on Facebook as well. I have to thank the entire panel, your expertise, your knowledge. It was incredible. It was exactly what I was hoping for. And I hope that the people who are watching this was able to at least pull something from it and see a human side of a police officer with all this crazy stuff that we have going on today. Mr. Swain as well, sir. Thank you so much for what you've done for the community, for holding down downtown Greensboro the way that you do. I'm very proud to know you. Miss Alana Thornton, ma'am, thank you so much for being the voice of the young people out there. You did a great job. For those who don't know, she just jumped in yesterday. So she came in at the drop of a hat. She represented herself and her peers very well. I also would like to send a special thank you to the Accountable Youth Board for putting all the hard work and effort in the background. We've been going hard with this for months now. So it's just amazing all the planning that goes into a 1 hour discussion, but it couldn't have been done without, of course, Ms. Nashaka Proctor, Dr. Wendell Fortson, Miss Flora Debrick, and Mrs. Kristen Williams, and of course, Mr. Kareem Ellis. If you haven't done so already, please like us on Facebook. Feel free to share this video. And as Shaka mentioned as well, we do have another town hall that is planned for October 14th. It will be live on Facebook again, just like this one.
Yes.
And I believe Chief James is already a part of that one as well. But it will not be on policing. This one will actually be on government and voting as we prepare for the 2020 election. So with that being said, thank you to everyone on the call, and we hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.